It's Valentine's Day, and since the spirit of love is in the air, I figured for those of us in the gaming community who may not have a stacked out harem like Joker in Persona 5, or play it cool at the bar like Bayonetta or Catherine's Vincent, it's time for us to show our love to, rather than a significant other, or as well as a significant other, we should show some love to some underrated video games that deserve just a little more attention than they may have received. So, we're going to dive in just below the veneers of popular, not quite down to the bottom of the bargain bin with the 99-cent copies of the latest FIFA game or Kane and Lynch 2, down to the games that people enjoyed and may have been moderately successful, but whose full potential was never truly realised, either by a lack of marketing, coming out at a bad time coinciding with bigger releases, or hampered by its own studio, or to just ones that are kind of forgotten about until prompted. You know the kind, the ones that result in a, "Oh yeah, I like that game, whatever happened to it?" Now, do all of these games that I'm about to mention necessarily need a modern remake with 60 frames per second, stable, with native 4K and ray tracing? No, not necessarily. And yes, I'm looking at you, Lollipop Chainsaw Remake, without any of the original soundtrack and the quote-unquote more realistic graphics, which sounds very charmless. But these are some of my favourite underrated gems that deserve a little more love than they ever seem to get in comparison to their peers, and as such, I thought, why not this Valentine's Day give them their own little pedestal? If of course you'd like to see a list of games that do need a remake for today's modern console generations, then hey, let me know in the comments below and we can get around to compiling a list for that too. But before that, let's get some honourable mentions in. Now, I tried to make this list more recent, so as to be able to pick them all up, at least via backwards compatibility on modern consoles. So sadly, the Wild Arms collection and the aforementioned Lollipop Chainsaw miss out. In the latter's case due to it only being available on the PS3 and 360 respectively. I'm not including the grey areas of emulation for this video. Likewise, there's no room for more dated titles like Soul Reaver as per one suggestion, and whilst I was asked by many to include Castlevania Lords of Shadow on here, I can't really consider the best-selling Castlevania game of all time to be underrated. Even if the elitist retro gaming fans consider it more of a God of War clone than an actual true Castlevania. Catherine itself also gets an honourable mention too, though with its puzzle game elements being the core mechanic of the gameplay, it does find itself in a more niche field to begin with, and I think most people would argue it's appropriately rated by fans of that genre. Nevertheless, here's my list of underrated gems for you to give love to this Valentine's Day and beyond, all well worth picking up, especially at the cheap price that most of these games go for.
Now enjoy the show until we meet again.
We're kicking off this list with Alice Madness Returns, American McGee's 2011 entry into the Alice series, a sequel to 2000's Alice, and at time of writing, Alice Asylum is supposedly underway under his helm with EA. This third-person action platformer really sets the bar for underrated gem. It does have a cult following, and for good reason, yet coming out around the same time as Duke Nukem Forever, which had all the headlines for all the wrong reasons, Fear 3, Shadow of the Damned, and mere months after Portal 2, its critical and commercial success were hindered in a landscape littered with big names and poor reviews. But there is so much to love here. A huge sprawling game with so many levels, plenty of secrets and collectibles. Let's not even get started on the stunning visual design, the artwork, the stages, the character designs, the amount of outfits for Alice you can get alone. A sheer beauty. They really are so graphically stunning, especially for the time when a lot of games were just very ugly, bland and grey. But not only that, the soundscape, the moody atmospheric music, which really gives it such a surprising amount of depth. And let's not even then get started with the actual gameplay itself, because the amount of depth that there is in the game is not just platforming, it's not just action adventure. There is some combo systems in there of a sort. Think Devil May Cry meets a Ratchet and Clank platformer, meld the two, and that's what you have here. There's also a neat little shrinking and embiggening mechanic. Obviously that is part of the Alice in Wonderland lore, and the amount of lore that's available in all the game, both in the dream world and in the real life London that we see Alice living in. It's just an incredible large game, so much bigger than I think a lot of people give it credit for, and there's certainly a lot of different layers to get involved with. It's available on all systems, and it's currently a part of Games Pass. I believe it's also on EA Access, so you should be able to get a hold of it either very cheap or for free, depending on what system you're on. It's definitely worth giving a first or a second chance to, and comes highly recommended and very much worthy of the first spot on this list of underrated gems. This second title should need no introduction, which makes its inclusion on this list somewhat galling, as the fact remains a lot of people never really gave this action-packed slice of GTA-inspired true crime sequel a good go. That's right, remember the True Crime series? No, of course you didn't. Neither did most people. However, its final outing was spun off into this amazing game, Sleeping Dogs. Playing as undercover cop Wei Shen in a bustling Hong Kong, and playing the police and triads off against each other as you see fit to finish out the story is so much fun. With a fluid martial arts fighting system that can be upgraded with more moves learned from your old Sifu, and some very fun environmental finishers a la the Batman Arkham series, with solid enough vehicle traversal and an awesome soundscape to boot, this should have everything that you would want from an action adventure game, especially in the early to mid 2010s when this came out. Hong Kong looks really vibrant, it looks amazing in this game, and it's a location that really doesn't get much light shone on it, especially when you consider most games are either very solidly based either in Japan or in America. So to come to a new area really gave it some depth that I think a lot of games didn't really show back then. And sure, yeah, it has all the quests, the side quests and unlockables you'd expect from a title of that era, without the more modern predatory microtransactions luckily, and there were a great few fun DLCs to boot too. But it was a story that really shone through, and it no fact was helped by the amazing all-star voice class, including the beloved Emma Stone. But Emma Stone aside, there is a lot more here to love. Wei Shen deserved better, and there is still talk, even though it's not been confirmed, that there may still be a film made of this, but I think that's probably just speculation at this point. The fact does remain though that there is still an audience for this game, even if not at the cinema, definitely in homes on console, and you should definitely pick up this game if you can. It's usually on sale for around $2.99, so yeah, it is worth getting Wei Shen's fist dusty for. Okay, so at number 3, and rounding out some of the more bigger budget titles on this list before we start looking at some of the more smaller indie games, we have another arguably huge name here in Avalanche Studios' Mad Max for the last generation of systems. However, unlike the previous entries, this title had the unfortunate luck of coming out in quite the banner year for video games. Mad Max was unlucky enough to come out in the same year as The Witcher 3, Fallout 4, Bloodborne, Undertale, and the more modern gen version of GTA 5, to name a few. But not only that, not only coming out in the same year as all of those great games, it just so happened to come out the exact same day as Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain. And that's more than bad luck, that's just bad planning. It's a shame too, as had it been released earlier in the year to coincide with the Tom Hardy Mad Max film, which these games and film aren't related, but the cross promotion definitely could have helped. As for the game itself, a very solid fighting system, again similar to the Batman Arkham series, is in play in an open world game where you look to rebuild your car and take revenge on the gangs who left you for dead. The vehicular combat is superb, way better than the aforementioned Batman Arkham Knight, and the rest of the game is filled with the usual kind of open world Ubisoft trappings that you expect to see. Bandit camps, convoys to take down, watchtowers, hidden treasures, and then the game's quest that splits the map into different areas to control and commandeer. There's plenty to get stuck into. Yeah, sure, by end game, you might feel, oh, this is getting a little bit repetitive, but that's probably more down to the fact that it is set in a post-apocalyptic desert. So you can't really blame the environment for feeling samey by the time you've reached 20 to 30 hours into the game. It's usually on sale in all platforms, so a rock bottom price, and there is no excuse not to add this one to your playlist.
Lord Scrooge, it's gonna hurt you more than you could ever hurt.
Sliding into this list from 2019 comes a charming little platformer from a much maligned and now sadly defunct studio, Lab Zero's Indivisible. Whilst the studio may no longer exist, the games that came from it are certainly still available on all modern consoles, as well as Steam. They're usually on sale and are certainly worth picking up. Indivisible is a great game. It's a very fun and fluid platforming game with a fantastic visual style, a charming cast of funny characters, and a great soundtrack that melds it all together into a game that has a 2D charm on a level similar to the Shantae series, and yet is not talked about as much, which, and I know there are some controversies around it, may be again down to the developer and the situations that revolved around the studio being dissolved rather than the actual game itself. However, whilst I'm not here to comment and talk about what happened with regards to Lab Zero games in terms of the studio closure, I am here to talk about the game itself, and the game is definitely fun. There's a great learning curve, the moves are really great in it, it's very fluid, and as I mentioned before, visually, I mean, as you can see here on screen, the art style is very striking. The hard work by the team doesn't deserve to be overlooked, and yeah, that's why I recommend Indivisible. I think you should pick it up, lest it be turned invisible. Slipping back nearly a decade for 2014's Murdered Soul Suspect, and despite Square Enix publishing this airtight games detective game, sadly no large marketing push was made upon its release, and with critical reception as warm as Detective O'Connor's body, this game floundered during what you could consider the weakest year of the past decade for new games, with only the Telltale games' episodic content providing any real competition until Dark Souls 2 and The Last of Us Remastered came out. But the game itself has plenty of merits. The atmosphere and story are really well told, and the detective mechanics are very solid, very reminiscent of LA Noire in the way that the mechanics are actually set out for you to just find and discover clues, go about building your case before coming to any conclusions. This is broken up with some light hide and combat mechanics that provide some much needed tension, especially since our ghostly form doesn't exactly face much of a threat from the human realm. Sure, if you look at the Metacritic score for those of you who actually use such a system to decide whether or not a game is worth playing, you may think, it's not really worth it. But I have spoken to so many people when putting this list together, and everyone who has played this game doesn't have a bad thing to say about it. The sound and the ambience, the look of the game, sure, it may be a little dated now, but there is certainly enough of an atmosphere there to really grab you and suck you in. Put this on of an evening, you'll definitely have a fun time. We're very much keeping with the detective theme with this next entry, yet only popping back to the year 2000 as we have Paradise Killer, as recommended by Cannot Be Tamed as their 2020 Game of the Year, as then available for Switch and Windows, and now released just last year for Xbox and PlayStation as well. Now this is such a gorgeous looking visual detective game with fantastic character designs and such well written and voice acted dialogue. It deserves so much more attention, yet sadly it just so happened to release around the same time as Hades, and then in a year that was already burgeoning with huge releases, that saw it slip through most people's hands, which is a shame because it definitely didn't deserve to, and that's why it makes this list today. You play as the immortal detective Lady Love Dies, who's been in exile for 3 million days before being summoned to uncover mysterious deaths on the island of Paradise. Now, this game has so much to explore upon this island, and the more you do, the more mysteries you uncover as you get set to the heart of Paradise Island in search of the titular killer. Again, this is available on Games Pass as the time of filming, and well worth picking up and giving it a whirl. If you don't take my word for it, at least take Pam's.
Fabulous. Lady Love died.
Just so I don't get accused of Xbox bias, we're switching it up with a PlayStation and Switch exclusive next, with a 2020 release, 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. Now, for full disclosure, I haven't actually fully played this game yet myself, as my PS4 is kind of sat quietly gathering dust. However, in all the communities I'm a part of, when I asked the question of underrated gems, this came up time and time again, more than enough to warrant its inclusion. And then, having watched some friends stream this game, I can definitely see why. Blending side-scrolling action with RTS battles is no mean feat, and for such a small team at Vanillaware, only 29 people to put together a game with such a lavish art style and story, and to be localised during the height of the outbreak of the pandemic, that was no mean feat. And yet the result is a fantastic visual novel story with a wonderful cast of characters that has something for everyone. Blend that in with the aforementioned combat systems, and there really is a thralling game involving time travel, kaiju, mechs, anything that any anime fan would definitely want in their games. It's easy to see why every time you search for this game, it's accompanied by a "why you should play this" next to it. Heh, looks like I'll be dusting off the PS4 after all. Speaking of PlayStation and Switch only games, comes a very cute yet dark little series that really flew under a lot of people's radars. And I'm not sure if the budget price led some people to think it meant poor quality, but I'm here to assure you that the Yomawari series is anything but. Now, with the first two games, Night Alone and Midnight Shadows respectively, being released both on PlayStation and Switch, bundled together on the Switch I believe in the Long Night Collection, and the third instalment coming to Steam last October, which was called Lost in the Dark I believe. The series deserves its spot, all three of them individually, but I figured why not just throw them all together, because it's my list and yeah, I can do what I want. So they all definitely deserve it, and they all follow the similar vein. Basically, you play as the young girl protagonist, and don't let this very cute hand-drawn art style fool you, because it does belie a horror and mystery as we set out to find first missing dogs, then missing sisters, as we wander around our town at night when everyone else is tucked up in bed and we must rely on our wits to hide or distract the many monsters, or yokai as they're called, that come out once the sun has set. Whilst the third instalment did release on Steam, I'm not sure if it has yet released on consoles. I looked for it on the Switch earlier, couldn't find it. The series itself is quietly continuing its little journey, avoiding the bigger monsters of the horror series like your Resident Evils and Silent Hills, whilst carving out its own little niche in the genre, much like its protagonist. I hope it fulfills its journey, and rather than finding its family, I hope it finds a bigger audience in you. So give it a go now. Now, whilst sneaking under the radar has become rather somewhat of a theme for this list, especially for the indie titles in this list, you know a game has really slipped past most folks when there isn't even a single Wikipedia page dedicated to it. Well, at least of time of writing, that is. But if you look past that strange fact, and look more to the 9 out of 10 scores that it has garnered, and you'll see why you should be definitely picking up Rainbow Billy, Curse of the Leviathan. As having recently done so myself, I can tell you it's a very fun and colourful, pun intended, romp as you play the titular Billy, who upon the big day of getting set off the town fireworks is faced with catastrophe when a Leviathan, fed up of all the ruckus above him in the island, comes up and drains all the colour from the world, leaving you to travel around the world from island to island in an effort to make friends who will aid you on your quest to return colour to the world. With a very cute cartoon aesthetic, akin to Cuphead, a very gradual difficulty curve, and an emphasis on story and characters, and problem solving as opposed to mere combat, this game is very much one for all ages. Like I say, the visual style and the soundscape merge very well together, and it creates a very nice ambience that I think will appeal to a lot of players. This game is available on all platforms, and is currently part of the Games Pass lineup, meaning there's nothing to lose in giving this game a whirl. I'm going to avoid saying the stakes are high for this last entry because, well, it's a terrible pun. But saving my personal favourite for last, and a list full of favourites, means that Vampire is truly special, and to me, it is. Whilst arguably a setting of a pandemic-ridden city full of misinformation, struggling with the effects of poverty brought on by war, could basically surmise the plot of, well, let's face it, all of our lives the last few years. We're actually going back 100 years for the setting of this gem from Don't Nod Entertainment, brought to you by Focus Home Interactive. We play as Dr. Jonathan Reed, who returns from the horrors of the First World War, only to find London just as ravaged in its aftermath and in the grip of the Spanish flu. We find ourselves working in a rundown slum of a hospital in a less than salubrious area of the city, but one that allows the good doctor to juggle his dual life of doctor and also vampire, as he struggles between the two conflicting sides of him whilst trying to discover who did this to him, and having to find ways to fit into the vampire society he now finds himself a part of. Whilst the game was lauded upon release for its excellent role-playing mechanics, most argued that its combat system is what let the game down. However, I have found it no different to countless other games of its ilk that came out to much greater reception, and since the story and the role-playing elements are what its main core selling point is, I think that's where it should be really praised and, more importantly, assessed. The story, writing, the dialogue, the characters, the voice acting, the art direction, not to mention that chilling score, all provide such an enveloping ambience you can almost feel the thick fog of Victorian London on your skin as you play. And the engrossing story is one of the finer ones of the last few years, especially for a, I guess, AA studio. Dr. Reed may struggle with what is right for his morality, but I have no such struggle in recommending this title to anyone still to play this game. You won't regret your time spent, even if we aren't all immortal.
We await your return, warrior.